It's hard to follow the panel that just concluded and all the remarkable things that they've been doing. This is a panel that is focused on having the ability to support a lot of the work that the folks that you just saw and everyone here is currently doing and would like to do going forward. As I think about that panel, consists of a lot of pathologists, and it reminds me of something I had said to Jeff Golden that, 40 some odd years ago when I was under the illusion that maybe becoming a doctor was something I would have a skill for, which turns out to be completely untrue. I had read a book called The Making of a Surgeon, and in this book, one of the comments that this surgeon makes is that he views three kinds of doctors. The first, an internist. An internist is somebody he characterized as a doctor who knows everything and does nothing. And then there's the surgeon, who is a doctor who does everything but actually knows nothing. And then there's the pathologist, who's a doctor who knows everything and does everything, but too late. And I think one of the things that this conference shows, and I want to congratulate Chris for coming up with the entirety of the idea for these kinds of conferences, and Dan and Monica for really helping to put the entire group together. It's really outstanding, is that the pathologists now aren't too late. There is an enormous amount of work that they can do. But a lot of the types of work that they do is not necessarily in the front lines and doesn't necessarily get all the funding that it's required. We get about $5 billion from the NCI. We get other monies from industry and from other parts of the federal government. But there's still many gaps in the funding for the kind of research, both basic and also translational research, that the folks up here today and in the last couple of days have been talking about. And for that, people like myself and others who aren't good enough to be the doctors, aren't smart enough to be the people who can come up with the answers, but are fortunate enough to be able to contribute to help them do their job better. As we think about that, and we think about the role that we can play, what you're going to hear today are the story of a set of individuals who have had an enormous impact. And Mallika is going to go into more detail about each of them. I happen to know one of the individuals, Billy Starr, who, as you will hear, is somebody, and many of you are aware of, is somebody who's been able to take skills that he has in the non-medical area and put it to work creating an avenue of philanthropy that in aggregate has produced close to $500 million for medical research. And so the individuals that you're going to hear today play an enormously important role in making sure that the work all the other panelists you've heard the last 3 days can do successfully. As board chair of the Brigham, in the environment that, as Jeff's panel talked about, has enormous issues with reimbursement, enormous pressure on the ability of our institutions to financially support the basic research and translational research that will help solve the problem of cancer, philanthropy becomes even more important. So I'm delighted to introduce Mallika, who, as you all know, is not only a reporter for WBZ, medical reporter, but also a practicing physician at MGH. And she will introduce the rest of the panel. So, Mallika, thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was a long walk up here with some very intimidating music. I almost tripped. Thank you, everybody, for attending what is likely to be a lively panel discussion, New Philanthropy, Patients Driving Innovation. And as Scott said, patients driving innovation. Think about that, patients. Why? Because government funding has not been enough. As Scott mentioned, it's hard to believe because research funding from the National Cancer Institute for 2016 is $5.2 billion, an increase of $260 million over last year. It's a huge amount of money, but again, it's not enough. There's no doubt that donations through charities and foundations and private citizens have grown over recent years to help fund research in clinical care and patient support services. Researchers learned long ago that to have any hope of finding therapies and cures for diseases lie not just with government and industry, but also with American philanthropy and nonprofit foundations. With government budgets continuing to tighten, family philanthropies and disease foundations play an important role in promoting scientific progress in the U.S., especially in cancer research. In this panel, the leaders of some of the most successful cancer foundations will describe their approach, their challenges, and the rewards in supporting research, driving innovation, and helping to bring effective therapies to market. Henry Ford, the great American industrialist, once said, quote, "The highest use of capital is not to make more money, but to make money do more for the betterment of life." So without further ado, let me introduce you to three exceptional people who are walking the walk and fighting the fight. We start with Dr. Lou DeGennaro, who's president and CEO of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Interesting fact about him, he once won the Connecticut State Baking Contest, baking the best pumpkin chiffon cake.
Thank you, Mallika.
Congratulations. Your biggest achievement, clearly. Next,
I'll share the recipe for a donation to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Next to him is Dr. Judy Salerno, who's president and CEO of the Susan G. Komen for the Cure. She lives in Dallas and loves baseball, though she won't name her team. And she has taken all three of her kids to all 7 continents of the world. And next to her is Billy Starr, founder and executive director of the Pan Mass Challenge, whose birthday is tomorrow. You'll never guess how old he's going to be. 65. And he has ridden in all 36 PMC races to date. He will be riding his 37th in a few short months, right? So we're very lucky to have all three of these panelists here. So I'm going to actually have each of you introduce yourselves, and in 3 minutes or less, tell us a little bit about your organization and tell me what some of the short-term goals are for the foundations that you work for.
Thank you, Mallika. Again, Lou DeGennaro, president and CEO of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society was founded by a father and mother who lost their teenage son to leukemia. And their vision at the time was raise funds, support research, find a cure. And frankly, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society has been dedicated to that mission ever since. Research is the bow of the ship for us, and for a special reason. We don't know the cause of leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, the blood cancers, this constellation of over 140 different diseases. We don't know what causes them. It's difficult to think about a prevention strategy. Likewise, there's no easy mechanism for early detection. There's not a mammogram for leukemia or lymphoma, and so patients present with a full-blown disease. We believe that our focus should be on discovering therapies and ultimately cures, so that when a patient does present, the physician can tell them they have an effective therapy. So our focus is on finding cures. We prosecute that, if you will, in 2 veins, a strategy we call cures and access. On the cure side, we have a very aggressive research agenda. Since 1994, we have deployed over $1 billion to support research, both in the academic setting and in the private sector with small biotechnology companies, to drive and frankly accelerate the rate at which new therapies come into the healthcare arena for the blood cancers. That $1 billion investment has allowed us to touch the discovery or development of virtually every therapy currently used to treat the blood cancers. But some years ago, we had something of an epiphany. We realized that having an aggressive research agenda was important, but if patients didn't have access to these therapies, we hadn't done our jobs. And as a consequence, we have a second part of our agenda, which we call access, which involves support for patients, education programs, support groups, financial aid for patients, navigation of patients to be sure they have access to the right treatment at the right time. And we have policy and advocacy work, making certain that legislation, both at the federal level and at the state level, is in the best interest of blood cancer patients. So that kind of summarizes our top priorities.
Great. Judy?
Susan G. Komen is the world's largest breast cancer organization, and we're coming up on our 35th anniversary next year. And it started as a promise between two sisters, one sister who died of breast cancer, who asked her sister Nancy Brinker to do everything she could to make sure that others didn't suffer like her. And that was at a time when you couldn't say the word breast in polite company. There was a lot of shame and stigma around breast cancer. And the purpose of the organization was to bring that out of the shadows and to raise awareness. We have always been in a community-based organization. We have grassroots affiliates in 103 areas in the United States, and we have affiliations in 30 countries around the world. We know also, like Lou, that the purpose of discovery is inadequate without the delivery of the care. We've invested about $890 million as of last year in breast cancer research, making us the largest private funder of research outside of the federal government. But also $1.95 billion in community programs. At any given time, we're funding about 2,000 community programs, mostly safety net programs across the United States. And we feel that this is really what the key is to really making progress. Over the past 3 years, we've identified 3 areas as our main areas of focus, and we're trying to make sure that we can deliver the cures to the cures that we already know work. So one of our focus areas is in health equity, because there's staggering disparities in breast cancer outcomes. Particularly in communities of color. African American women, for example, have a 42% higher mortality rate from breast cancer than white women with the same stages of the disease. Simply unacceptable. So we've made one of our goals to reduce disparities in 10 largest cities across the United States by 25%, reduce that gap by 25% over the next 5 years, and we believe that we can do it. We've had proof of concept in several areas. The other area is in metastatic disease, because 40,000 women still die of breast cancer each year in the US, and we believe that if we can prevent recurrences either through vaccines, earliest detection of recurrence, that sort of thing, we can save lives. So between the health equity and initiative and the metastatic disease initiative, we believe we can make a significant progress in a very short period of time. And then finally, we have made a concerted effort to fund young investigators, because as funding for biomedical research has dried up, we realize that we are starving the pipeline of new investigators. So last year, 50% of our portfolio went to funding young investigators, and we'll continue to do that because we know that we need that next generation of breast cancer researchers in order to advance progress.
Thank you, Judy. Billy.
I created the Pan Mass Challenge in 1980, having lost my mother, uncle, and cousin to cancer. This was designed as an event that was for lay people with non-medical expertise who wanted to play a role. In 1980, as people on this panel would know, event programming was in infancy, if it in fact existed at all. It was more bingo night, black tie events, and maybe pay a registration fee. And the Pan Mass Challenge came on the landscape to basically say, very simply, if you could ride 200 miles on a bike, that's your blessing. You ought to raise some money. And that's where I put my line in the sand. It was designed to raise money for research and treatment at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and that mission statement has not changed for 37 years. We were principally one route for about 17 years before I started to diversify what the PMC was and is. The PMC is now 15 different routes through 46 towns, 360 miles of infrastructure, 6,000 riders, 4,000 volunteers, over 250,000 donors per year, who this year alone will probably provide over 60% of Dana-Farber's unrestricted money, and a fundraising goal of $46 million. It's a dream come true, but the devil's in the detail. I would say that amongst what we try and do is create an environment that wouldn't be lost on any of the working professionals in this room, which is to try and do something that's bigger than yourself. If you ride a bike, you know where you stand on the food chain. But on PMC weekend, you're a god. And the reciprocity between communities and riders and volunteers is something that we just don't get every day at our work. I don't get it from my kids every day. But on PMC weekend, you are validated. And to do that, people are willing to, sort of belly up to the bar every year on very aggressive fundraising minimums. The PMC has become a largely alumni event. And while we still have like 1,200 first-year riders, we're primarily an 80% alumni event where that guy or gal probably has over 8 years of being in this event. There is no stronger advocate for an event, or perhaps even a hospital, than a layperson talking to their family and friends about how they've been empowered, their personal experience. And through the years, we've gotten pretty sophisticated at arming our cadre of people with the fundraising tools, the stories, the transparencies, and where the money is going that we do not designate, but put at the disposal of the president of the Dana-Farber to make that decision. All of that and the very A-type kind of guy and gal we do tend to attract has created a bike raising phenomena that, interesting, is being replicated in other parts of the country. Cleveland, Columbus, Seattle, St. Louis, LA, Toronto, other countries as well. And there is something about the bike. I'm all for every kind of sweat equity equation, but there is something about the technology, the speed, the teamwork, the wonderful aspect that biking is the sport of middle age and rehab that perhaps has attracted so many of us who might have done no sports or a lot of sports, that this is a wonderful sport to age with and to make a philanthropic statement, and that you could be part of an annual goal that's up on the kind of dollars that we represent is very empowering. That's the kind of atmosphere we try and create every year, and I'm pleased to be, the advocate that gets to say every year pretty much the same message: we got to do more. And my group seems to respond to it.
Thank you, Billy. Let me encourage people from the audience to write in questions, if you have them, for our panelists. Jumping off of what you just spoke of, Billy, your bike race has become a phenomenon, and you have raised goo gobs of money from it. But how do athletic events like this, walks, bake sales, things like that, how important is that for your organizations to raise money? And how hard is it to sort of engage the public and get them excited about donating, because you're competing with so many different nonprofits out there?
Sure. So last year we raised $300 million. The average donation was $75. And Billy, I think your activities, prove the old fundraising saw that people give to people, right? So you have a participant in your challenge, and they reach out to their friends and family to seek funds, and there's a multiplication factor there. And the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, we have no money from the federal government. All of these are individual donations, private donations. It's a challenge. 25 years ago, mirroring a little bit of what Billy did, we created an endurance sports training program called Team in Training. Over that time, Team in Training has trained 600,000 individuals to participate in an endurance sports event, a marathon, a triathlon, a 100-mile cycle ride. And that has allowed us to raise well over $1 billion that we've been able to then put back into our research and other mission efforts. So I think this is really key, and it is a challenge that we all face on a regular basis. Our organizations, so we don't hold on to the dollars that our donors give us. Our goal is to turn those dollars around to the mission as quickly as possible. The beginning of the year, we reset the dial back to zero and start that fundraising effort all over again.
I participated in the Team in Training many years ago. But Komen as an organization has been known for, and in fact invented the race for the cure. And when I think about it, we've had 23 million people cross the finish line since we had our first race in 1982. But it's been very challenging. The first race we had in Los Angeles, we were the first charity race ever. Last year, there were over 300 applications for charity races and walks. So it's a crowded space. But we believe that it's important. We have over 150 races each year. We believe it's important because it builds community, and it builds an awareness and loyalty to coming back over and over again for the cause. So it's much more than raising dollars. It is giving people a sense of belonging and doing something, as you said, greater than yourself. That I think makes people come back year after year after year and challenge themselves to raise more, to bring more people into their team. So it's important because of what it does and for that sense of community. But it's important also, I think, for organizations like ours not to bring people out for one day and then have them come back the next year, but how to make them dedicated and passionate about the cause for 365 days a year, and that is a challenge.
There's a metaphor in a sports event that I think is really relevant. Cancer patients want to win; they want to beat the disease, and I think that metaphor carries over into what they want to do in this arena, what their friends and family want to do in this arena, and it's really an opportunity it's a practical manifestation of that desire to win.
I'm interested, again.
I think the Chronicle of Philanthropy in the last year said that the sport fundraising business is now about $4 billion a year. And yes, there's a reality that we all compete with each other. But there's good news with that as well, I feel. And I'm very proprietary about what I've done, my event, my cause. But when I was starting, and as a baby boomer, even the word cancer, the World War II generation, we were supposed to be protected. The whole, what Kennedy did with Peace Corps, the cancer community for lay people was like, stay back. What I see now with younger people, they've all been brought up with a sense of giving back, regardless of what we feel as parents about their sense of entitlement. They know more about philanthropy and volunteerism than I certainly ever did as a 18-year-old. And in my event, we have over 1,000 people under 30 years of age. And that's not easy for a 20 to 30-year-old to meet the PMC fundraising minimums, which are $5,000 plus. And yet, the technology, which I'm not always a fan of, definitely enables people to reach out to their world. And as was stated earlier, the whole culture of friends asking friends creates a bond that's different than what used to be direct mail or maybe a celebrity spokesperson. When it gets personal, people tend to be extremely supportive. Naturally, we all want to expand our networks, how we do that, how we make it real, how you protect the integrity of the relationships. In our world, we don't see ourselves as a development organization. We don't touch the relationship between our riders and their donors. We don't reach out. We arm our riders with the information to customize, personalize, and share with their donor base. And I think in that sense, we all end up winning. Obviously, if you're a smaller disease, you're in a tough marketplace. You're talking about 3 majorly successful programs here, very well known, and everyone feels they should do more. And that you can't assume anyone's DNA would be any different than that. But there are thousands of people trying to run causes for lesser known events, trying to get into this landscape. But increasingly, everybody knows that it's going to be the public and people like us who are funding it. And that's been generally more accepted with the knowledge of where government is sort of spinning its wheels.
So along that point, and also talking about the importance of needing to engage young people and even children and families, in this case, the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS research. I'm curious to know what you think about that, whether you've given sort of any thought on how you can sort of tap into that kind of engagement that's sort of spread around the world. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot, actually. And interestingly, I mentioned team and training. So what did the Ice Bucket Challenge do? The Ice Bucket Challenge allowed the ALS Society to raise money from a constituency far bigger than their core, right? People around the world learned about ALS and the challenge, and were willing to contribute to that. So rather than simply raising money from affected families, they were able to raise money from a much larger constituency. Team and Training, this program that we created 25 years ago, did exactly that. There was a niche there at the time. About 5 years after we stood Team and Training up, again, it's an endurance sports training program largely focused on running marathons. About 5 years after we stood it up, Oprah Winfrey ran a marathon. And running a marathon became what everyone wanted to do, and we were the training program of choice. So this allowed us to raise money from a constituency far larger than our core. So in an odd sort of way, Team and Training was the Ice Bucket Challenge for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and it didn't last 1 year, it lasted 25 years. We're very active on the social media side now, primarily because we need to raise awareness about the society's activities for patients. I mentioned the support groups, the financial aid, the education programs that we have for patients. If patients don't know about us, if they're not aware of what we can offer them, we're not able to deliver those services. And so our activities in the social media space in particular are focused around getting the word out about what the society can offer and making certain that patients around the world know about it.
Well, I think that certainly I wish we had thought of the Ice Bucket Challenge, but I'm not looking at the next best shining object out there. I'm not chasing it because I'm really more interested in developing people who are passionate about what we do, who can become advocates and who can appreciate that, as you said, it's a competitive space, but what we really need to do is to figure out how we can work across organizations better, because it is a case of a rising tide lifting all boats. And I think we don't do a good job of that. And unless we have people who are there not just for 30 seconds of the ice bucket on your head, but people who really understand the urgency and the necessity of doing more for cancer research and for patients today suffering from cancer with needs from financial through social through treatment, then we're not going to make any progress.
For the last dozen years, the PMC has a kids rides program for ages 3 to 12. And the distinction between PMC Weekend and the kids rides program is they don't ride as far, and we don't attach a credit card policy to the children, though could be coming. But you know, our kids ride we have 37 of them, mostly in Massachusetts, New England, but some as far away as Maryland and Ohio. And what we had recognized a long time ago, and again, no different than anyone probably in this room, is that our alumni parents wanted their children to understand what they were doing, perhaps why they were training, maybe why they were away for the weekend, but obviously the bigger picture about giving back for what is, in our demographic, a pretty affluent group of people who are participating. So when we brought this to families, it was a natural. Obviously, we're also creating our own farm system by doing this. We have over 5,000 children and probably 10 to 15,000 adults worrying about them when they're on bikes. But these children are now matriculating as 15 years old, which is our legal age minimum, into PMC Weekend. And, you know, again, they get it way better than we did when we were 15. We've also entered the realm of indoor cycling, which is a huge market and is a natural, what we call a spoke in the wheel of the PMC umbrella that makes perfect sense for us to perhaps capture a market that loves to get on a bike, but only indoors. So that's part of our growth strategy and spreading awareness to a different audience.
We're getting a couple of questions from the audience. How do you, and I know that, Billy, your monies are sent to Dana-Farber and they decide what to do with the money that you've raised. But for Lou and Judy, how do you and your organizations decide where to spend the money? And are you heading more towards clinical trials? Is there discussion about partnering with drug companies? Sort of what's happening?
Well, first and foremost, our focus is on the hematological malignancies, the blood cancers. So leukemia, it's really a constellation of 140 different diseases. The ones that are most familiar are leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, myelodysplastic syndrome. That's our focus. We have a variety of programs that span basic research all the way through clinical trials and funding in academic research, as well as partnering with the biotechnology industry. We have a long history of funding academic projects. Currently, the program is funding about 300 active projects in academic centers all around the world. We have no citizenship or geographic restrictions as to where the dollars go. We receive about 1,000 applications a year from scientists and physician scientists all around the world. We assemble expert peer review panels to read, review, and rank those applications, and we make funding decisions based on the guidance given by those peer review panels and a research agenda that we craft together with our scientific advisory board. On the private sector side, we instituted a program in 2008 where what we recognized, we saw a gap. We saw small biotechnology companies that had agents that could be active in the blood cancers, but they weren't being developed. And they weren't being developed in part because there wasn't funding in the capital markets. And so we began to partner with those companies, providing non-dilutive capital, but also access to experience, our own internal expertise. We have a research team of about 8 MDs and PhDs who are focused on the blood cancers and who are drug development experts. We can bring that to these companies. We have a great entree to key opinion leaders in the blood cancer space. We run a clinical trial matching service, so we can bring a lot to these companies. Last not least, I suppose it's the good housekeeping seal of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society as well. And through that activity, the goal is to accelerate the rate at which these new therapies are moved through the development pipeline and get to patients. And I think we've been fairly successful there. I couldn't help but listen intently to Joe Jimenez's comments about Gleevec and about CAR T therapy. So the backstory to both of those was, before Novartis got involved, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society funded the basic research that led to the discovery that the drug that's now called Gleevec in vitro in the laboratory could kill CML cells. So we positioned that to the point where the pharmaceutical company could pick it up and take it further. On the CAR T therapy side, we began funding the UPenn effort in 1998. And from 1998 until 2012, when Novartis stepped in, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society had invested nearly $20 million. So I think my point here is there's a continuum there from the basic science right through drug development and discovery and development in the industry, and organizations like ours can play a role in that continuum, certainly developing the earliest research and then feeding it and accelerating it into the private sector.
We have a very similar process and a similar profile, comprehensive funding across the continuum, from basic right through clinical trials. But we're always thinking, and a peer review process, but one thing about our peer review process that is, I think, rather unique is that it's patient-driven as well as science-driven. So we have patient advocates on every single peer review panel. And they actually change the direction of some of our funding because of their insights and what they see. And most of them are pretty sophisticated about what's going on in the science, because it's their lives they're talking about. They're all survivors. And so we're really very, very interested in thinking with each dollar that comes in, what's the next best use of that donor dollar? And when something like the $250 million immunotherapy bolus of money that comes through from Sean Parker, it gives us pause, because I have to think about, when I look at our investment, okay, we've put X number of millions of dollars into immunotherapy. What is now, with all this focus on immunotherapy, what isn't going to get funded? What is going to fall by the wayside? And we have to think about things like prevention. We have to think about the earliest detection, prevention of recurrences, that sort of thing, as perhaps better for our investment, where we could have added value rather than thinking about putting more money into immunotherapy. When I worked in Alzheimer's research, everybody was on one bandwagon with amyloid theory, and everybody put research and their dollars into developing therapies around prevention of plaques and tangles and amyloid deposition, and hasn't panned out. So I believe that we really have to think carefully about not ignoring other areas for this one very promising area of research. So it's important. I think when you think about things like immunotherapy as well, we think of it as the next greatest thing, and something that's maybe been on the horizon for 5 years or so. However, decades of understanding of the basic biology and the insights from that biology has made it possible to get to where we are. So I think that we can't ignore investing in the basic science, because that's where the next insights, the next treatments will have their origins. So we have to really be focused on that as well.
So it's all about diversifying your portfolio and not just focusing on what the hot topic of that decade is. We have another question from the audience. Panelists, what are you doing to empower patients to push for faster cures?
I'll mention something that we have just done within the last couple of weeks as an example. The FDA is interested in incorporating patient preferences into the drug discovery and development process and into the labeling process. And they've opened the doors to us. And 2 weeks ago, we brought a group of 14 acute myeloid leukemia patients and caregivers to a meeting with the FDA. The FDA oncology leadership, Dr. Pazder, his direct reports, and about 20 FDA staffers gave us a half a day of their time in dialogue with the patients to understand their issues and concerns and their preferences as they pertain to the approval of new therapies in cancer. I thought this was a wonderful opportunity to have the regulatory body engage, or the regulatory agency engage with patients in that kind of dialogue. And I was amazed at the level of dialogue, the questions that came from Dr. Pazder and the other FDA staffers, and the responses of the patients. There was a true dialogue going on there that made me proud that we were able to actually activate this. So that's just one example of how we're giving voice to the patient.
We like to think of ourselves as a patient-driven organization. As I said, we have a very strong advocacy component to our work, and we have about 100 advocates in science who are survivors, who we train up in the science so that they can go out into their communities and talk about the science. We also have a number in our local affiliates, a number of programs with survivors and scientists where they come together and give presentations in the community to help people understand why it's important to invest in cures as well as to provide treatment now. So we last week were on Capitol Hill, and in a single day we made 370 visits to congressional offices to advocate for not only cancer research, for all biomedical funding research, and for specific programs, oral parity across all cancer drugs, that sort of thing. So we have a very, very active advocacy component. It's one of our key pillars.
Billy, can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between PMC and Dana-Farber and whether you facilitate?
I will, but I'd like to echo a little of what Judy was saying. On a smaller scale, we're doing very similar. We have a live telecast show on WBZ-TV for our opening ceremonies. We put cancer survivors up there to tell personal stories, interaction with the Dana-Farber, how their lives have been impacted. We have a living proof community of cyclists that when we started tracking data, it was as little as 15, and now there are over 400 riders per year who are cancer survivors. I think you know also that the advocacy and patient role in the designing of the new Yawkey Center was front and center as to how the building actually got built. Sensitivities and priorities of patients were heard. People who engage, who broaden their definition of a cancer survivor, are great role models for people battling disease and frankly, people evolving in their personal identities, senses of mortality or perhaps even immortality as to what they can do. And there's again a wonderful metaphor that if you're able to ride this bike, we do a picture at the end of day one that has become really one of the signature moments of the PMC weekends. We do a champagne toast, and it's quite powerful. And the message isn't lost on anybody of what we're capable of in a larger setting.
So it sounds like you have a perfect situation in which you are able to highlight and promote individual patients and family members, and the Dana-Farber is able to tap into that.
And even as a year ago, Previous proved, what could be better or what could be a blessing than to ride 200 miles in a driving rain and know that is your blessing. Would you rather be taking chemo? And it's a universal, I'd rather be here. Yeah.
Well, on that note, just like that, we are out of time. I want to thank each of you for being here today, and thank you for all the hard work you're doing and your organizations are doing, your volunteers, your donors. You clearly are making a difference. So thank you.